Hello, and the warmest of welcomes to episode 4 of Not If, But When, the podcast which answers all of the questions you have ever had about all things funeral and many of the ones which may have never even occurred to you. My name is Kirstie Atherton. I'm an independent celebrant and I'm based in the northwest of England.
And I'm Lyndsey, Conquest. I'm also an independent celebrant and I'm based in Bedfordshire. Well, welcome to episode 4, The Elephant in Your Purse. Yeah, it's time to talk money. But Kirstie, before we start, will you share with us something life-affirming from the last week?
I'd love to, yeah. And if, funnily enough, it kind of threads on a little bit from what we were talking about in the last episode, and that's people's openness or otherwise to discussing funerals. So I put my toe into the corporate world, which obviously is a little bit of an itchy fit for me, because I joined a networking group, a women's networking group, and one of the people that I met there was a hypnotherapist. And she was particularly curious. She was open. She's really enthusiastic about the work that we do, and I'm very enthusiastic about the planning side and the wishes and the talking about it and the kind of plugging away that you and I do to kind of break down the wall that's been put up around it. And it was just so lovely. It was so reassuring. It's really, yeah, I do find it really reassuring when somebody can see the potential of what it is that we are trying to do, and it's not somebody who particularly has thought about death and dying much before themselves, but just thought, oh, that's interesting. She was saying she literally had never sort of heard anybody in public sit and talk about that as if, it was, yeah, just like a really unusual thing. So I thought, well, that's really lovely that there are those people who haven't had these conversations, but are actually really open to it when somebody approaches it. And she was lovely. So that was very life affirming. And as you might expect from a hypnotherapist, she had a lovely, gorgeous, soothing voice. So sitting and having a coffee with her first thing in the morning was really lovely.
Yes, essential for the job, I would thought, isn't it?
Exactly that. I'm not a coffee connoisseur like you, Lynn, so I'm not sure what standard the coffee was, but it tasted all right to me. So what about you? What's been life affirming for you since last we podded?
I think mine's probably on a similar point to yours, Kirstie. Mine's when my partner was having a conversation with someone about funerals. Now, I
Oh, he's
honestly
well
don't
trained.
think, I know that conversation would not have happened before he met me, I assure
No.
you. And they were having a conversation that I won't go into, but they had asked him, should I actually be asking, with the name My Loved One, about what they want at their funeral? And his
Mm.
reply was, yes. Yes, this is exactly what Lyndsey and Kirstie are trying to encourage people
Oh,
to do.
he's a good lad.
Yeah, I know. So the conversation has started, Kirstie. It's already
Oh,
making a gentle impact on the people around us and
yeah.
encouraging people to talk about it in a relaxed, non-confronting or depressing way. So
Yeah.
that was just really, yeah, really lovely to hear. I was like, yes, it's
Oh,
just trickles out, doesn't it? It's the trickle
yeah.
effect. We just start
Yeah.
impacting a few people and then they start talking about it. And before you
Yeah.
know it, your whole community is just a little bit more open to maybe
Yeah.
thinking about and discussing these things.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, Lindsay. That's gorgeous. Well done him. He's awesome.
Yes. Yes.
Which we knew already, didn't we, anyway? But
Yes, we did.
um, but yeah, that is lovely, isn't it? It's just changing, it's yeah, just smoothing that little bit of distress out, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. What a joy. Lucky Elle does.
Yeah.
However, we're going to get it out of
Mm,
the way, aren't we? We're going to do it. We're going to talk about money.
we
Um,
are.
so as much as people feel weird about talking about funerals, people sometimes often feel weird about talking about money. So this is why we're just getting it out of the way. We're just talking about it now because it's not something people really want to think about. But if we're talking about funerals, we can't not talk about money because, like every other service we need in life, it's not free.
No.
So let's have a start with having a little look at the average cost of a funeral across the UK and Northern Ireland. So every year, the organisation, the company Sun Life, produce a report, and it's called the Cost of Dying Report. So most of what we're going to be talking about today, in a totally not boring and statty kind of way, I promise you, is based on the most recent figures from Sun Life's Cost of Dying report. So, right, Lyndsey, I've given you the lovely task here of telling us to sock it to us. How much does a funeral cost?
Okay, here we go. So, the first thing we probably need to clarify, Kirstie, is that the cost of dying and the cost of a funeral are two very different things.
Yeah, they are.
So, the cost of dying being referred to here includes any of the sort of professional fees you may need to pay in relation to the estate. So, a
Yeah,
solicitor or an estate agent.
yeah,
Um, and the cost of what's referred to as the send off, essentially everything that takes place after leaving the more formal bit, often referred to as the wake,
yeah.
and the funeral itself. So, in that sense, we've got two figures, but we're going to focus on the latter, of course, aren't we, Kirstie?
We are, absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
And as you'd expect, it's a figure which differs depending on where you are in the country.
yeah,
So in 2023, if your funeral was held in my area of the country, the average cost would have been around £4,643.
yeek.
Eek, yes. And if your funeral was in the northwest, where you are, Kirstie, the average was £3,802. So a difference of around £800 between the two.
Yeah, which you would expect, I guess you would expect there to be a
Yeah,
difference. But either way, as a top line figure, that is pretty scary stuff, isn't it? They
it
are pretty
is.
scary numbers. I mean, even before the cost of living crisis, there can't have been that many people who could easily lay their hands on the best part of 5 grand at a moment's notice, or without it significantly impacting on their life and their own plans. We can't time when these deaths occur. And we can't time how close sometimes they come together, and so those figures can be really scary.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also worth us noting that the cost of a funeral is made up of two distinct elements.
Yeah,
So let's call these the ones that you can control and the ones that you just have to accept.
yeah, yeah,
So, shall we chat about first, Kirstie, the cost that you just have to accept? The
yeah. There's
ones you
no way
have no,
around this.
yeah, no way around them. So you've got your cremation or your burial fees, of course, which are set
Yeah,
by your local authority or private crematoriums or burial grounds.
yeah,
Although, Kirstie, I was going to ask you, I don't know about in your area, but here there is a distinct difference in the price of two of my local crematoriums. So although you've got no control over that, you in a way you
yes,
have, because you can shop around or you can ask your funeral directors.
yes,
I know one that I work with regularly. They're very good, and they do tell the families, if they ask for one, they will say, they'll just be
yeah.
transparent and say, there is a difference in cost. This one is this much, and this one is
Yeah,
this much, and let them make their decision.
yeah, absolutely. In terms of our local authority ones, that local to me, not so much. But
No.
in terms of the private ones that are popping up, um, people very often assume that because it's a private one and it's fancy and shiny and new and state of the art, that it will automatically be more expensive than the local authority one, which has been there forever and is usually in a kind of Victorian building or some kind of weird 1960s kind of construction
Yeah.
building. I like those ones. They automatically assume that the private ones will be more expensive. And in my area, the opposite is the case, which is quite shocking.
Exactly. And it's hundreds in my area. It's hundreds
Yes.
difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's significant. So a standard cremation in my area is around the £900 mark.
yeah, yeah. It's similar here, but it
Yeah.
it can, yeah, it can go up.
Yeah,
considerably. So it's
yeah,
well worth yeah, just looking at your options and talking to your funeral directors if
yeah,
they were able to let you know. So
yeah. That's a really
um
good point, isn't it? Ask those questions.
yeah, because
Yeah,
they will know. So
yeah,
a lot of celebrants and will know the answers as well. But your funeral director is someone that will definitely
yeah,
have those facts and figures and be able to talk to you as well.
yeah,
And then we've got fees like doctors' fees.
yep,
Can't get around
absolutely.
those, can we?
No, can't get around those. You absolutely need doctors to sign on a death certificate, and they charge for it, and there's nothing you can do about it. You've got to
Yeah,
pay it.
yeah. And some of those sort of other standard fees as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so one example of that would be something that people very often don't think about, where if somebody is going to be cremated at the end of their life and they have had a pacemaker fitted, that pacemaker needs to be removed before
Yeah,
that body is disposed of in flame cremation. And there is a cost attached to that. I actually was quite surprised at how little it was in my area to do that. Lots of funeral directors might charge separately for that, and lots of them might not. The
yeah,
most expensive I saw was about £100, but that's something as well that you're not going to be doing that yourself. You need somebody
no,
who's skilled and knows what they're
yeah.
doing to do it, and you can't get around that.
Yeah, you definitely can't. If you're having a cremation, that there are, yeah, that has to happen. And
Yeah,
it's a cost you can't control.
yeah,
But there are things within our control, aren't
yeah,
there? There are things that we can choose and we don't have to choose, and things that vary in price as well. So things within your control then. So embalming, Kirsty. So that's
yeah.
very much within your control, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a choice.
Yeah,
I have heard of funeral directors who have told families it's not a choice, that's their standard practice. If you want to do chapel of rest visits, again, something which is in your control financially because there'll be a
yeah,
cost for chapel of rest visits. If you want to do those, you are going to need to choose to get your loved one embalmed. But you should never, ever be told that that's what has to happen. And particularly because that I have a particular interest in eco burials.
yeah.
And in that sense, embalming is an absolute no, that you wouldn't be able to then bury a body in a natural burial ground if it had been embalmed. So that's
No,
completely up to you.
yeah. And as you touched on with the chapel of rest visits as well, I
Mm,
found I've sort of an independent that I work with. I don't even think they charge for chapel of rest visits at all, but some do, and some definitely charge if they're outside of office hours. So if they're in the evening, or you want to go at a weekend, then they make an extra charge. So these are all
yeah.
questions to ask if you're not told up front from your funeral director. And
Yes,
you
and
know
also to check what is the limitation with that.
yeah,
If you may not be paying an extra fee for chapel of rest visits, but if you are, ask those questions. How often can you have them?
yeah.
Is the charge per visit? What length of time is the visit? There's a wonderful independent that I work with who's really open and flexible about this, and I know
Yeah,
that there have been occasions that people have literally been to chapel of rest for a couple of days on the run for hours and hours and hours and sat with their loved one. So, yeah,
yeah,
all questions worth asking to your funeral director. Absolutely.
definitely. And then transport,
Mm,
lots of options there, but you've got the obviously your standard transport to consider is a saving you can make is first of all, do the family need to be transported to the
yeah,
crematorium or cemetery? That's a
yeah,
big one because that does cost more money,
yeah,
and some families that's really important, and some families haven't got their own transport, so they
yeah.
need that, but it is something you do have control over.
You do.
And also just the many different types of transport if you want to go
Oh,
sort of
I
outside the
can't wait
full
for that
hearse.
episode.
I know there's so much to talk about, isn't there? We've got so many options, but yeah, it's definitely a cost within your control.
Yes.
And again, you can talk about that with your funeral director and find out what options they've got available and what the costs are.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Things like your choice of officiant, there will be different, potentially different fees for different officiants. So
yeah,
there might be a particular celebrant that you've seen do a service that you really, really want. And the funeral director, I think it's safe to say, will probably make the assumption that they will charge the standard Church of England fees, which are released in January every year, but that's not necessarily the case. So that is worth checking as well. Obviously, we're totally biased, but when you think about that top line figure, Linz, of how much a funeral costs
Yeah.
and how much of that goes to the work that the officiant does, it's an eye opener, isn't
A
it?
very, very small, very, very small part of
Yeah,
it. Yeah, definitely. And then there's the coffin, which I think,
yeah,
maybe there's a little bit more sort of knowledge out there now that with people, a lot of people being on social
yeah.
media, that you can see the options available to you. But
I think you're
the
right. Yeah,
price difference is just astounding to me. I just can't believe the difference in, you can have a coffin that's a couple of £100 maybe,
yeah,
and you can have a coffin that is thousands and thousands and thousands
yes,
of pounds. And
yes,
so you
yeah.
definitely have control over that.
Yeah, you definitely do. And also another future episode to really look forward to, the discussion of coffins and probably some tales from our day out at the National Funeral Exhibition and
Yes.
our opinions on some of the weird and wacky and wonderful coffins we met that day.
Yeah. Yeah. That I wasn't allowed to get in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a standard, surely, isn't it? Give us a go.
Oh, I
Let's
know,
have a
so
go in it.
disappointed.
I know, so you've got to check how comfy it is, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and whether those linings are really cheap polyester or whether they're a really
I
nice
know, you
satin.
just need to know. Yeah, it was
Need
the
to know.
wool lining. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. I'm getting
Oh,
carried away.
you're
I'm
thinking of
looking
the one.
forward to that one. The
You just
wool.
reminded me of the lining that we both touched and went, oh, that's a bit itchy. And then we both realised that it's a little bit irrelevant at that point how itchy your lining is.
Do you know, I'm actually sure that I would still feel the itch of the wool. I'm that sensitive to it that even when I'm dead, I will still get
Oh,
irritated by it.
you're
So
such a princess in the peelings, aren't you?
I am.
Oh, no,
Oh, okay. What's
the
next?
big one, things that are in your control is flowers. I mean, there's a whole world
Yeah.
of discussion over flowers, isn't there? I
Yeah.
came across in the Costa Down report a little tiny list that funeral directors had put together as part of their responses to the questionnaire Sun Life sent out. Um, and it was their top tips for saving money, and their first one on that list was flowers. Just to
Right.
inform you, the other ones, it was no limos, which is what you've just said,
Yeah.
orders of service, no order of service, and also I found this quite interesting. This is me being out of the arc again. Opting for social media announcements rather than printed press announcements, which is what people used to
Right.
always do. There's a whole world of financial difference there. But
Yeah.
flowers are a massive one. We've seen a trend recently in our area, which I welcome, which is people actually hiring a faux flower um,
Right.
tributes, hiring them, having them on the day, they then get collected by whoever you've hired them from again. And I would say, as the celebrant who's standing right next to the coffin, particularly at the point of farewell or committal, you can tell close up that they are not real flowers, but actually anybody sat in a seat in any gram wouldn't be able to tell that they weren't real. So that's a trend that we're sort of seeing. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and even people hiring out now, when you get the chrysanthemum letters and you get mum
Yeah.
or biffa or whatever it is in letters. Now, locally to us, they are around £50 a letter to do with fresh flowers. So if you imagine you're having granddad down one side of the
Yeah.
hearse, and then you're having brother down the other side of the hearse, that's really adding up. They are costs that are adding up significantly there.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes you see a difference. So sometimes flowers are so important to people. And if the person
Oh, they're
absolutely
really important
loved
sometimes. Yeah.
flowers, so there are
Yeah.
all these sort of alternatives and options. But also, just if you want fresh flowers, then
Yeah.
you know, maybe just I see families sort of contributing and just having one really
Yes.
special arrangement between them all. Or when you've got the
Yeah.
willow coffins and they've got the floral garlands that
Oh,
the local florist, to me, she just spends honestly, her work is amazing.
they're
But
beautiful,
it's
aren't
just
they?
putting the money into just a main family tribute rather than having lots of sort of
Yeah.
little ones that sort of just sit around. It's something that
Yes.
maybe you can take back with you to the
Yeah.
wake, just one really lovely arrangement, whether
Yeah.
that's faux flowers that you've hired or whether it's fresh flowers from your local florist. There are
Yeah. Yeah. And
things you
then
can do.
absolutely. And then you've got the chance of deconstructing that, haven't you? And then sharing them out and people actually keeping them in their houses for kind of the rest of the flowers life. I agree with you. I mean, for me, flowers would be important because it's something that I particularly love. So
Yeah,
that would be important. But I guess what we're saying is you can control these costs. And if flowers are massively important, then you've got the chance to think, okay, well, if we sacrifice having the couple of limos and we all just make our own way there or get an
yeah,
Uber or whatever, um, then actually we have got this money that we can put into flowers, and that's really
yeah.
important. The other thing to bear in mind is if somebody was a really keen gardener, and I've had a couple of funerals like this, what they've actually collected flowers and foliage from their own gardens, and that's what's formed the floral tribute, and that's been really lovely.
Lovely. That's a lovely idea. Yeah. Um, and next up, I suppose, is the order of service. That's definitely
Mm,
somewhere that you can save money on, isn't it?
yeah. Yeah, it is.
Um,
Sometimes they really matter to people. And
yeah,
sometimes they could literally just get left on the seat in the crematorium and you think, oh gosh, all the
yeah,
money that's gone into that, apart from the
yeah.
time and the energy as well. Uh,
Yeah. I think maybe going a lot, just looking at options. If you're going to spend
yeah.
that money on something that you're going to hand out to people, maybe make it more of a keepsake.
Yes.
You can, some
Yes.
people have made bookmarks, some people have
Oh, I
got
love
something that,
that.
more like a photo tribute that
Yeah,
is sort of a postcard with loads of different photos of the person on. And then on the back, it's
absolutely.
just a short breakdown of what to include in the service.
Yeah, yeah.
Or
I
just don't
find,
have sorry,
no, go on, or just,
don't have a printed version
yeah,
at all and
yeah,
go a bit
yeah.
high tech. I don't know whether you've heard of this, but there, I know this is going to shock you, Kirsty. There is an order of service company locally to me that we're talking about having an option for people to view the order of service on their phone.
What?
So, yeah, so obviously, as celebrants and funeral directors, we often get a proof available on an email where we can check the order of service before it's printed.
That's right, yeah.
And they were discussing the option where families could maybe have 20 copies, but also that there's a
Um,
link that they can distribute to people, that people can actually view it on their phones. Now, there is a whole conversation around that, really, which we won't go into. I'm not comfortable with that, even though I like being with the times more than you do, Kirsty. But I just don't think it's a great thing, but it is a way of saving money,
is,
and for
yeah.
some people it might be right. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I have a bit of a thing about order of services. I, like you, the ones that are like a kind of keepsake. I did a funeral for a lady who was an artist, and they put a couple of pictures of her paintings onto bookmarks and a little
mm,
tribute, couple of words about her on the back, and they were gorgeous. There wasn't a single one of those left in the creme at all. They were really, really lovely. What I find, I don't know whether this is probably a future episode anyway, but um, is that very often families don't really know what an order of service is. They'll say to me, oh, we've done the order of service when I first
yeah,
meet them. And I think, well, and I say to them, how have you done the order of service? Because we haven't discussed what your content is. What is it that you want to do? And what they mean is we've put a document together that says the date and who this person is and the dates of their lives and some photographs. And actually, that's something else. An order of service is an order of the service, but is it really relevant? I don't know. Do people need to know that after we've walked into, One Love by Bob Marley, there's then going to be a warm welcome? Well, obviously there's
yeah,
going to be a warm welcome.
yeah.
What else is there going to be? I don't know.
I suppose
I'm
where
going
it
off on a
comes in
tangent.
important is if you're having hymns or you've got a specific reading that's really important that you'd like to have it printed.
Absolutely.
Obviously, hymns, if you can't have the words on the screen, then
Absolutely.
that's when they really come
Yeah, they
you
do.
know, they come in as an
Yeah,
important thing.
they absolutely do. Yeah. And people very often want a poem that's being said to be printed in the order service.
Yeah,
And that gives me a bit of a twitch as well, because I think, well, people have read it then. And, do you not want them to hear it for the first time? I don't know. Anyway,
I feel, yeah,
digress.
same. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned
um,
screens and technology, which leads us
yes.
beautifully into our kind of final thing that you can save money on if you are so inclined,
Yeah.
which is
So
tributes.
yeah, yeah. So there's a whole long price list of extras that you can have at your local crematorium. Obviously, if you've got people that can't be at the service, then a webcast is really important, Kirstie, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because it allows them access to that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
with that comes a cost.
it does.
Um, and then
Yeah.
lots of other ideas as well. What other options do you have at your prem?
Well, do you know? It really, really varies. So geographically, the closest local authority creme to me does not even have a screen. Doesn't
Ah,
have a screen
okay.
yet at all. Which, and I know that I'm out of the arc, but I am at the point where I am accepting that everybody should be able to have a photo tribute if they want one.
Yeah.
And they're lovely. They're absolutely lovely. But anybody opting for that crematorium cannot have that option. And because they can't, if a local funeral director is working under the assumption, as they often do, that people want to go to the nearest creme to them, they don't even mention photo tributes, because what's the point? There's no option to do that. Whereas if you drive 5 miles down the road into another borough, yeah, they have the option. It's absolutely fine. And they have screens, and yeah, they can do the whole shebang. The thing to remember there as well is that there can be additional extras there. So if you are offered a webcast and that's something that you want, you've got relatives or friends who can't travel to the service, but you want them to be able to see it, there are different prices, because the webcast, for it to be live online that people can access, is one cost. But then if you want to be able to watch it back and watch it at a later date, or for it to be recorded, or for it to be kept forever, there are additional costs to that. And very often there are costs for a standard number of photographs for a slideshow tribute. And then at the creme I'm particularly thinking of, which is about 5 miles from me, um, they charge a set fee for £25, and then they charge per photograph after that, or per
Yeah,
5 photographs or whatever. So yeah, always worth really kind of digging down into the figures, I guess, isn't it? And just saying, okay, I appreciate you telling me that this thing is going to be £50. What do I get for that? And then you
yeah.
can decide, is that worth it? Is that something that's worth spending that money on?
Definitely, yeah. And if you're paying the money for that webcast, then sometimes it's only a very small amount of money to then have a keepsake that's available and things like
Yes.
that. So if you are
Yeah.
paying that initial outlay because you have to, because someone really wants to watch it that can't
Yeah.
make it, then it's good to look at the other options that are available, because it might be for an extra 10 or £15. You can then have
Yeah.
one of the keepsake options that they offer, which
Yeah.
some of them are really lovely. So yeah.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
I think, if you are having a webcast, like that for me, that's a complete no-brainer that you would do that, because how lovely to be able to look back at a funeral,
Yeah.
that it's been recorded. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Um, Something I often hear people say, Lyndsey, I imagine you hear the same, is people saying, "Oh, all funeral directors, they're all much for muchness. They all charge the same anyway." And I think it's worth pointing out that that is just simply not true. They don't. They don't. The costs that you have to accept, which we discussed,
Yeah.
um, they are non-negotiable. All funeral directors will charge the same for them, because they're not setting that fee. That is a standard fee. But most other things, the prices are set by the funeral director, so it is well worth shopping around. And our next episode is going to explore choosing funeral directors and what to look for. So we're going to pin that for now and not get too much into it.
Yeah.
But let's have just a quick look at some of the choices people did make last year and the differences in cost of those.
Yeah. So once again, we saw the continued rise of the direct cremation,
Yeah.
which, Kirstie, do you want me to explain quickly what that is
Yeah,
for
if you can
people?
give us it in a nutshell, that would be lovely.
So basically, it's exactly that. It's a cremation, a direct cremation where your loved one is looked after by the funeral director just the same, but you
Yeah,
don't have an attended service at the chapel,
yeah,
at the crematorium. They take your loved one directly to the crematorium,
yeah.
and that's it in a nutshell, isn't it? No
It
one
is.
is
Yeah,
present for the service, and
yeah.
the
Because there is
funeral
no
director.
service. Yeah,
Yeah, there is no service. Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Yeah. And then the
yeah.
funeral director take them on a set day that they choose to a
Yeah.
specific crematorium that they normally use for their direct cremations.
Exactly
Um,
that. Yeah.
and what 20% of all funerals in
I know.
2023 were made up of direct cremation. Is that
I
right?
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
huge, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's shot up because considering that, sort of, I think it's even like about 7 years ago, it was such a rarity. It just wasn't offered. But now it's enormous. Yeah, 20% of all of the funerals in 2023. That's shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, yeah. So our least expensive option is our direct cremation, then
Yeah,
maybe our direct burial, and
yeah,
then cremation next. And I would say burial probably at the more expensive end of the
yeah.
option.
Absolutely the most
Um,
expensive. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but
Obviously, that's
what
why I want it.
yeah, yeah. I think I do. I'm still a little bit undecided though. I keep changing my mind on that. So I really need to
Yeah,
just get it. Yeah, I keep writing one thing down and then changing my
do
mind.
you?
So
Yeah,
yeah, but
interesting.
yeah, but so worth noting that of those who opted for a direct cremation, 33% still held a wake for their loved one,
Yeah,
or after that, and then 27% held a memorial. And 18% actually held both, which I find is really, really interesting and reassuring for me. Although I'd like to see that number up a bit higher because we've spoken about the importance of
yeah,
these sort of ritual, haven't we? And these
yeah.
services to help loved ones in their grieving process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I found that really interesting because when I looked at the 18% who held both, essentially what I thought was, so really you've had a funeral.
Yeah,
If you've had a wake and you've had a memorial, the only difference has been that you haven't had any of that in the presence of the loved one's body, that. And I
yeah,
understand completely that cost. It's a real factor for people, and that's very often why people opt for direct crime, and that's totally understandable. Um, and in the cost of dying report, the recent figures that were in that showed that when people were thinking about their own funeral, 37% of people said that they wanted their family to spend as little money as possible. It is important for people, which is totally understandable,
of
particularly at the
course.
moment. Yeah. But it's also really interesting from those figures that there is still clearly a need in most of us to do something more, that the direct creme on its own is not enough, that we do need something extra. So it is well worth looking at what are the things that you can save money on so that you can still, if you want, have an attended service.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I totally agree. I think, just ask those questions and just look around to see, yeah, where you can save that money to,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, to help you.
And also to be aware that, we do not live in Victorian England anymore. You are not showing how much you love your loved one by having the fanciest display, the fanciest plumes on the horse-drawn carriage. People do
No,
not judge on those terms anymore. And if your nana always loved a bargain, you going for the most expensive option to wander at will have a turn it in a grave because what
definitely.
she'd want you to do would be go to for the most reasonable option and then spend the rest of the money on something nice for yourself because
Yeah,
that's what nanas do.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
brilliant.
Okay, so
So I think we're there, aren't we?
I
I
think
think
we're there. Yeah.
yeah. So again, we really are hoping that this fourth episode, check us out, has helped you to have a better understanding of all the things that do influence the costs of a funeral, the things that we can control, and also being aware that there are costs that we do just need to accept. We do legally need to dispose appropriately and respectfully of a body. That is the only thing that we are required to do when somebody dies, and they are the costs that we just have to suck up, and the rest is all up to us. So like with everything about funeral, it's all about choices, and it's about being empowered with the information so that you can make the choices that are most appropriate for you.
Yeah, so hopefully you've enjoyed today's episode. If you find yourself intrigued about what's coming next, then intrigue no longer, because next week's episode is all about funeral directors and how to find the one for you. Now, you'll find that on Spotify, so feel free to tell the whole wide world that we're there. We know stuff you need to know, and we are not at all scary.
We really aren't. And
Mm,
sometimes we can be a little bit funny too, only
we can.
occasionally. Yeah. So stick us back into your ears for that one. And until then, embrace every day whilst embracing the inevitable. Bye.
Bye.